Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the odder SCPs in the Foundation's custody. The Foundation has plenty of weird and downright silly anomalies, as we've covered extensively in the past. Plenty of them are objects that you wouldn't imagine need to be under heavy containment, but you'd be wrong. Even innocuous household objects with a harmless albeit annoying anomaly can pose an immense danger to normalcy and human life. So today we're going to be taking a look at SCP-2966, affectionately and nervously referred to by scientists on break and at the water cooler with an odd nickname, the InfiniTP. TP, of course, refers to exactly what you're thinking of, toilet paper. Just based off that nickname, you've probably already gotten a pretty good idea of what this anomaly is, but you'd be surprised. Just because something is predictable doesn't mean it's harmless or easy to contain. SCP-2966 is contained at Outpost 117, a small isolated little facility far, far out in the icy tundras of northern Canada, well away from any other settlements or Foundation sites. It's kept so far away because of any other SCP objects coming into contact with SCP-2966 is incredibly dangerous and prohibited under any circumstances. It's also kept so far away from cities or towns for another reason. Below the ground, Outpost 117 is host to an experimental thorium nuclear reactor. Thorium reactors are highly efficient nuclear reactors, but only a few exist in the entire world for scientists to perform research on. What's one doing under a tiny, out-of-the-way facility in the Canadian wilderness? Well, all nuclear reactors produce a lot of heat and energy, as they're designed to. This reactor is right next to the containment chamber SCP-2966 is locked in, pumping heat into the chamber at incredibly high temperatures. SCP-2966 can only be removed for experimentation, study, or cleaning when enough heat has been pumped into the chamber to heavily reduce how much matter there is. But the SCP Foundation is in the business of containing anomalies, not destroying them like the GOC. Why would they be using nuclear power to slowly and constantly degrade what seems like a fairly innocuous anomaly? Well, clearly, it's not entirely innocuous. Outpost 117 staff is as bare bones as the facility itself. Only a single skeleton crew of 16 people. Just enough to keep the facility and its reactor up and running without risking any casualties. 3 nuclear engineers trained in the upkeep of nuclear reactors, and 4 Foundation researchers to monitor the reactor and SCP-2966 containment chamber. Along with that, there are 8 trained soldiers from the Foundation's MTFs to guard the facility and its perimeter 25 kilometers out from the outpost itself. But that's only 15 people. Who's the 16th? Well, unsurprisingly, it's a D-Class subject, to be used for direct experimentation with the anomaly. Considering most SCP sites have personnel counts in the hundreds or even thousands, 16 seems remarkably little. But the Foundation has learned their lesson from past breach events involving SCP-2966. The D-Class in the orange jumpsuit has an extremely important job. Every 8 hours, 3 times a day, the D-Class is to use SCP-2966. Given what we know the anomaly is, you can imagine what that entails. But whenever it is used, at least 10 sheets of toilet paper have to be removed from it and, well, used. That use is heavily monitored by the research team, and a few of the MTF troopers and radio communication is maintained through the whole gross event. The research team advises the D-Class on whether to speed up or slow down the rate at which they tear off paper from SCP-2966. There's other equipment too. A vast array of sensors and scales to measure SCP-2966 mass and density, and the data is fed back to the researchers and into the nuclear reactor's systems. Needless to say, all of this is extremely strange. What could a role of TP, infinite as it may be, possibly do to warrant a dedicated research team and nuclear reactor? Not to mention regular use experiments and constant monitoring of its data points. Whatever it is dangerous. The Foundation is currently constructing a runway for jet aircraft just outside of Outpost 117, so that personnel can evacuate should something go critical. Not the nuclear reactor, but SCP-2966. Clearly, whatever it can do, it is more worrisome than a nuclear reactor going into meltdown. We've got a lot of questions by now, so let's see if we can figure out what exactly SCP-2966 does. Our predictions from the name, however, were entirely accurate. SCP-2966 is an anomalous branded roll of toilet paper. For security reasons, we can't tell you the brand, but we can tell you that it's entirely possible SCP-2966 might have a distant cousin in your own bathroom. The first strange thing about SCP-2966 is its weight. It weighs at least several kilograms, though its weight is usually changing and Foundation personnel are told not to try reducing it, not after the incident. Anyway, it sticks around 5.5 kilograms. You'll notice that it's a lot heavier than you'd expect a toilet paper roll to be, given it's made of, well, paper. Its weight isn't the only unusual thing about it. It's also really good toilet paper, anomalously good even. We won't go into detail because I don't think anyone wants the details on that, but let's just say the best toilet paper you've ever used. SCP-2966 is softer, stronger, better in every way. But once a sheet is ripped out of SCP-2966 roll, it's not anomalous anymore. It can be used and thrown away normally. SCP-2966 itself is attached to the wall inside a metal housing, the kind you'd see in a public bathroom, with no way to remove or replace it. Not that it needs to be replaced. X-rays and ultrasounds of the metal housing are inconclusive, but the Foundation doesn't want to cut into it with saws because, well, you'll see. Not to mention the fact that the metal housing is the main way the reactor's heat is funneled into SCP-2966, and playing with nuclear power is a little risky. But what's actually anomalous about SCP-2966? Well, it's an infinite roll of toilet paper, but we knew that already. Since SCP-2966 was contained, at least 10 kilometers of toilet paper have been pulled from it, over 6 miles. The research team hasn't seen any evidence of it absorbing mass or producing new toilet paper, and testing has revealed it's not pulling the paper from an alternate dimension or reality. Despite all the testing, the researchers are baffled by how exactly SCP-2966 keeps producing the toilet paper that it does. But even if they don't understand how it happens, they have gained a pretty good understanding of what the results are. And the results are a lot less fun than you might think. See, SCP-2966 still obeys the first law of thermodynamics. Matter and energy can't be created or destroyed, only change forms. So SCP-2966 doesn't actually create toilet paper so much as it absorbs energy from its surroundings, then transforms that energy into matter, more specifically, toilet paper. How exactly it absorbs energy is unclear to the Foundation, but they've run the math. One sheet of SCP-2966 weighs approximately 3 grams, which means that approximately 2.04 times 10 to the 16th joules of energy, or roughly 65 tons of TNT, is needed for one sheet of SCP-2966 to be produced. From there, they were able to extrapolate that SCP-2966 contains at least several thousand sheets within the roll, an extremely large amount of explosive power, all contained in a roll of toilet paper. Now you get why SCP-2966 is so dangerous. It's not just a roll of toilet paper. In the wrong hands, it could be one of the most powerful explosives ever detonated, easily able to wipe out half a country. But if you think that's where SCP-2966 danger really lies, think again. Removing SCP-2966 sheets is harmless until you remove 10 of them at a time. Then it'll start absorbing the energy around it, at roughly the rate that the sheets are removed. It's trying to rapidly gain energy to rebuild itself, and it'll get the energy from anything. It's usually in the form of heat energy, but it will absorb anything, even sound. But when there's no active source of power, SCP-2966 becomes dangerous. It starts sucking up energy from the ambient heat around it, and given the large amount of energy, it sucks up fast. In only a few minutes, it can bring the temperature of the room it's in to absolute zero, completely stopping all molecular activity. This has happened twice when the power went out at Outpost 117. Both times the casualties were high. Research personnel sacrificed themselves to run into SCP-2966 chamber and start ripping sheets away from it, bringing the temperature down. They all died from hypothermia, but they saved the entire site and stopped SCP-2966 from going critical. You see, when SCP-2966 isn't used for a while, it starts to decay. The matter it's gained in the form of toilet paper is reduced back into pure energy, radiation. Thankfully, it's not ionizing radiation. the kind you'd find in a nuclear bomb. It's simple heat and alpha radiation, mostly harmless if you're equipped right. After extensive testing and more than a little trial and error, the researchers figured out the perfect distance between using SCP-2966 after letting it absorb energy and letting it decay into radiation: 8 hours. That's why the D-Class has to use SCP-2966 every 8 hours, because if it goes over, something very bad happens. SCP-2966 decays matter and energy exponentially, and gets faster and faster the longer it's left untouched. Within a day and a half, SCP-2966 goes critical, at which point the rate of energy radiation gets so high that it starts rapidly getting close to infinity. Sounds like a lot of complicated physics, right? So let's bring it down to terms all of us will understand. When the rate of energy decay becomes infinite, what happens is that SCP-2966's entire mass is converted into energy in a single moment. All that energy stockpile is released in one gigantic, titanic explosion. Remember how we mentioned that SCP-2966 could feasibly be used as a bomb? Yeah, this is that bomb exploding. The explosion would result in at least 1,000 megatons of TNT. For comparison, the Tsar Bomba, the Soviet mother of all bombs, had a yield of about 50 megatons. Needless to say, SCP-2966 going critical and exploding would very likely be an XK Class doomsday event. Aside from blowing up half of Canada, it would cause wildfires, tsunamis, and easily blanket the sky in ash and soot, choking out plant life. And that's all aside from the massive human casualties. The Foundation has long since realized that even though Outpost 117 is out of the way, SCP-2966 going off would be much, much more than even they could handle. Thus, the containment procedures currently in place. Keep SCP-2966 right in the sweet spot so that it doesn't need to absorb energy from people. But make sure it doesn't get enough energy that it decides today is a great day to extinguish human life as we know it. When SCP-2966 was being used by the D-Class, they noticed something a little odd. The D-Class, from the toilet on their radios, reported that the room temperature of the containment chamber seemed to drop a little. The researchers aren't quite sure of what this means yet, but the D-Class also reported that the paper removed from SCP-2966 is exceptionally comfortable, strong, and effective as toilet paper. A handful of the researchers submitted a proposal to remove sheets of toilet paper from SCP-2966 and re-roll them to send to other Foundation facilities. But due to the risk and possibility of accidentally creating another SCP-2966, the Council denied it out of hand. So now we've got a much better understanding of what the heck SCP-2966 is, and how a little roll of toilet paper could pose such a massive, overwhelming threat to not just the Foundation, but all human life, and why the containment procedures are as extensive and thought out as they are. The research teams at Outpost 117 are hard at work performing additional research on SCP-2966, but there are still big questions. Most importantly, how was this thing created? Who created it? And how did the Foundation get a hold of it and learn what it could do without accidentally detonating it? Well, SCP-2966 was discovered after global weather satellites noticed the temperature dropping in a small part of the Canadian wilderness. The Foundation, being tapped into the Global Information Network, also noticed and realized the temperature drop was anomalous. Agents in the area confirmed that something strange was going on, and Mobile Task Force Theta-19, the Rocketeers, found a small research facility named Pine Range Research out in the backwoods. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was how it was completely frozen over for an entire square kilometer, despite it being a warm summer day. The MTF measured the temperature, then rechecked it 3 more times to ensure they hadn't gone insane. The temperature was negative 108 degrees Celsius. For comparison, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth was negative 90 degrees Celsius. The research team are now able to say that the only reason everything wasn't at absolute zero was because the breach had happened hours ago, and the sun had time to warm everything up a little. The Mobile Task Force breached into the building and found a scene of devastation. All individuals in the building had been killed from hypothermia and exposure. As they went further in, they encountered a lecture hall, with one researcher giving a lecture to others holding SCP-2966. Because SCP-2966 had completely frozen everything, all the electronics in the building were corrupted, and the Foundation couldn't get any useful data. But the MTF did discover a handwritten journal by the researcher in one of the offices, and was able to recover small sections of text after thawing it. The journal was a small diary of research notes and daily happenings from the researcher. It detailed how the Pine Range Research Company had achieved a huge breakthrough in toilet paper technology. Their new, highly effective toilet paper formula was somehow infinite. The company had been experimenting with anomalies. They planned to monetize the product and even expand into other paper products. But a few weeks later, the researcher detailed how the project had hit what he called a minor setback. They weren't able to produce cellulose fibers making up the paper fast enough to make the roll truly infinite. It would eventually run out before restocking itself. But he had a solution in mind, though it was rare and expensive, using a halved isotope of the element hafnium, known as quaternium. Though the Foundation hasn't been able to find any other evidence of such an element, the researcher admitted that he was a botanist, not a physicist or chemist, but he was perfectly capable of understanding the research papers written by his colleagues on the matter. He claimed that in this day and age, anyone with a doctorate should be able to understand others' work, if they wrote it clearly enough. He was dead set on figuring out a way to make his project work. And work it did. The very next entry detailed how a metallic housing of the toilet paper was complete. The initial roll of toilet paper had been added in, and soon the quaternium alloy would be complete, for insertion into something called the hyperbaric containment field. They were still running into issues here and there, particularly on the matter of the radiation that it was constantly emitting, but the researcher was confident that they wouldn't hamper the rest of the design. Unfortunately, from the frost damage, the remainder of that entry was rendered illegible. Another entry the Foundation was able to recover from the journal was dated to the day before they encountered the temperature drop in the Canadian interior. The researcher wrote about how the energy required for the production of radiation and from it, the toilet paper, was higher than he expected it to be from his calculations, but he wasn't worried, and planned to rework the calculations slightly differently. He didn't have time to walk it back for more extensive testing and modeling, since the first test of the prototype was tomorrow. From what the entry read, he was excited that the world would never again need toilet paper. The rest of that page was filled with equations, only some of which the Foundation were able to decipher. But the Foundation mathematicians discovered what went wrong when they solved the equations by themselves. The researcher had made a very simple error early on when calculating E equals mc squared, which led to his entire work being thrown off and coming to a conclusion that the energy output wouldn't nearly be as high. Of course, the researcher was tragically and fatally incorrect. His desire to save the world from toilet paper shortages might have been prescient, given current events, but his lack of care and patience led to the deaths of him and all of his co-workers, and the creation of SCP-2966. The Foundation moved in and suppressed the event with a cover story of a burst liquid nitrogen tank, and amnestics were disseminated to any local witnesses. Since the Foundation couldn't safely move SCP-2966, they chose to convert Pine Range research to Outpost 117 and contain it where it was. But SCP-2966's story isn't quite done yet. Remember how I mentioned that Foundation personnel aren't allowed to try reducing SCP-2966's weight since the incident? Well, a few months after SCP-2966 was contained, an experiment was performed to see if SCP-2966's mass could be reduced if they pumped it full of energy while rapidly removing sheets. But SCP-2966 immediately went critical and exploded, albeit with a much lower yield than if it had been fully energized. Outpost 117 was completely destroyed, and all the staff were killed, though no civilians were harmed. But in the smoking crater, SCP-2966 was recovered unharmed and significantly lighter. Though the Foundation has rebuilt Outpost 117 and recontained SCP-2966, they've learned that simply letting it explode by itself is not a solution. This toilet paper just won't quit. Now go check out SCP-1984 Dead Hand and SCP-186 To End All Wars for more explosive anomalies from SCP Explained.